Hello and welcome. We are here today with Jim Fleckenstein, or is it Fleckenstein, Jim?
Stein, like a beer stein.
Stein. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
We're here with Jim Fleckenstein today, and he is a longtime polyamory activist, author, relationship coach, and here today talking to us about the history of the polyamory activism and some of his findings on research he did with aging folks in polyamorous relationships. So, what did I forget from your introduction, Jim? What would you like to add?
Oh my gosh. I left all my stack of hats in the other room. I worn many, many hats. This is, I'm kind of on my third or fourth career, depending how you look at it. But yeah, I've been involved in the consensual non-monogamy community, specifically mostly in the polyamory community since the late 90s. I'm a researcher as well as an educator, and as you mentioned, a coach, and for many years an activist in this community. So, worn a great many hats over the last 20 plus years. And
could you tell us more about your activism?
Sure.
What have you done personally, and what do you think have been the triumphs and the failures of polyactivism over the years?
Sure. Well, I came into polyamory looking for community like so many others. And I found in my local area, I lived in the Washington, D.C. area, there wasn't community. And so I got involved with 5 other people. We started a local poly organization, poly support group, that rapidly became one of the most effective and largest poly support groups in the country. And it lasted over 10 years. We were all delighted because there's a long history of local poly groups not surviving. They rarely survive their charismatic founder, whoever he or she may be. And so we were happy to celebrate our 10th anniversary. It was after most of us founders had kind of stepped away from it because we wanted to see if it would be sustainable. And it was for many years. And then eventually it ran out of volunteers and ran out of steam and kind of turned into a meetup, because DC area is very balkanized, like many major metros. Nobody wants to travel more than a half hour from home. And so the Marylanders started to hang together, and the DC people started to hang together, and the Virginia people started to hang together, and wouldn't cross the borders. They needed a passport. But nevertheless, it was a very successful endeavor, and it persists to this day in a different form. We didn't necessarily start out to be activists, but again, as the big local poly group, we started getting media requests, and so we did media stuff with the local media and that sort of thing. And it was back in the halcyon days when, people did the media thing. It was everything from Jerry Springer and Montel Williams and all the TV talk shows of the day, when we were the freak show. Poly people were the freak show, and we did some of that. And over time we've evolved, and now we get serious media attention. And we're not treated quite so much as the freak show anymore. So I think that's a major advance for the community, but it's taken us 20 plus years. It's one of those things where social acceptance follows, but it's been a long struggle. And, the poly community could have done a better job at it, but they did the best they could. Because again, we're a bunch of volunteers with differing things that we bring to the table, and different skill sets, and very few of us were skilled media mavens or public relations people. There were a lot of well-intended people who had no more business going on a major national TV show than sprouting wings and flying, but they were attracted to the glamour, the chauffeured limousine, the hotel in New York, and they went on there and presented an absolutely horrible face for the community. And it was made worse in the editing room, because few, if any, of these shows are actually live. And so it took us a while to get smarter about that. But fortunately, the attitudes changed as well. One of the things that you were one of the early canaries in the coal mine in pointing out is our question around diversity. Your paper on the privilege of perversities was like the first shot across the bow in mainstream literature about this notion that, all the research up to that point is, well, polyamory is definitely a phenomenon of Caucasian, middle class, overeducated people. And they were totally blind to what was going on in a variety of other diverse contexts. Now, in truth, the very first examinations of this in the research literature was focused on the LGBT community, most particularly gay males. But interestingly, like the first 3 or 4 books that ever came out on the subject were all done by females, and most of them lesbians. So that was an interesting kind of thing that happened. But now we're getting better at, we are by no means there, but we're getting better at looking at the diversity in the community and how this non-monogamous experience plays out in various diverse communities. The languaging is different, the social context is different, but it's, I like to use the term the Martian anthropologist. If I were a Martian anthropologist and I were observing secretly what was going on, how would I characterize it? What language would I use as the Martian anthropologist to characterize this thing? And so you can't strip it from all context, but you have to look at what's the commonalities and what's the core. And then you paint around the corners of the picture what the different contexts and so forth are. And there's a lot more similarity in non-monogamous behavior than there is nuance and difference when you look at it from that Martian anthropology standpoint. The interesting thing about it, though, is that the communities continue to snipe at each other. And rather than coalescing in some important way to advance their rights, they don't. They continue to be separate and continue to have what Peppermint called border wars, like between the polyamorous community and the swing community, between both of those communities and the BDSM leather fetish kink community, even though there's a huge amount of crossover in these communities between the heterosexual identified and the homosexually identified, across race and class boundaries. And these are all difficult boundaries to cross. I don't mean to undervalue the difficulty in crossing these boundaries. But if you look at any successful social change movement, what you find is ultimately the successful ones find ways to cross those boundaries, at least insofar as securing rights, passing legislation, that sort of thing. They make alliances. You in that arena, and one of my past lives included activism and government relations work and grassroots work and stuff in a political context. In those contexts, you have allies, but you may not have friends. And that's okay, because you're focused on what do you want to accomplish. And the poly community has been slow to adopt that. They still don't adopt it. When I talk to them about that, they look as if I had 3 heads. And it's very frustrating to me. I've had some very frustrating conversations with them about coalition and accepting that you're going to have allies and not friends. I spent 11 years on the board of the National Coalition for Sexual Freedom, which by its very nature is a coalition of organizations. It had its roots in the community, but it's expanded to look at the swing and poly communities as well. And within that context, it was the same thing. People just didn't talk to each other, or they talked past each other, or they didn't acknowledge the commonalities that they had. Well, I have a leather family, it's not polyamory. Okay, you have a leather family. And what does that mean? Well, it means we do this and this and this and this and this. And the Martian anthropologist says, well, guys, I look at my anthropology book and that's polyamory. No, it's not. And you talk to swingers, I've been to big swing conventions, talk to swingers, and it's like, well, we have play partners, friends, that we've been friends with for 20 years. We go to each other's kids' graduation ceremonies, we vacation together, blah, 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 blah. But it's just the lifestyle. We don't say the L word. We don't love each other. Why not? Because in our world, when you say you love somebody, that creates jealousy and it destroys the whole structure of what we do. okay, Martian anthropologist says if you hang with somebody, you have these kinds of familial relations with somebody, you have deep and abiding feelings for somebody, what is that? And it has a sexual romantic component, however defined. Yeah, that sort of fits into this Martian anthropology book of some form of consensual non-monogamy, and it's close to polyamory. There's a spectrum. I get that, but but no, it's not. It's not. Like, oh, stupid polys are a bunch of bead-wearing hippie. And it's like, no. The demographics of the various communities are different, or profoundly different in some cases, but there is a lot of crossover, and the communities don't leverage that effectively, and still haven't. 20 plus years into activism, they still haven't done a very good job of leveraging it, and they still haven't done a very good job of reaching out to each other and to other communities. There's a lot of animosity between the LGBT community and the polyamory and swing communities. Partly because the LGBT community felt like it was fighting by itself for marriage equality, which they've now achieved, thank goodness, and I'm happy for them. But they didn't want any free riders, and the poly community is divided as to whether it wants marriage equality or not. In this research that we referenced here, which I'm going to talk about a little bit, we found that a substantial majority of the poly community said, yeah, if legal marriage were available, we'd take advantage of it. But there's a lot of voices in the community that says, oh, no, we don't want that. We don't want that. Why don't you want it? Well, because that would just bring down the wrath of God on us. Not literally the big G, capital G God, but the fact that we would be ostracized and stigmatized even more if it was believed by the wider society that the poly community was reaching for something that was not legitimately theirs. So there's no one national governing body for this community, and there's nobody who sets down the rules. There's no pope. And so this community continues to be divided as to its aims and its interests and whatnot. There's a common thread of things that people say are wrong. The difficulty in child custody is wrong. The discrimination in housing is wrong. The discrimination in medical care and insurance, health care is wrong. I did a major presentation on what I call the boss in the bedroom. And that talked about the LGBT community was very good at getting, before legal marriage, prior to 2015, recognition for same-sex domestic partnerships written into the benefits policies of many major corporations. But almost all of them had a poison pill. You had to swear that you were going to be exclusive. And under penalty of perjury, I'm exclusive. Well, we know from research that a substantial majority of gay male couples are not sexually exclusive. That may be changing, we're not sure yet. A fair number of lesbian couples are not sexually exclusive. And by definition, polyamorous and swing people are not sexually exclusive. So it's like, yeah, we can take advantage of the domestic partner benefits only if you're willing to perjure yourself about whether you're sexually exclusive or not. And that, hit the floor with a thud. Nobody wanted to even think about that. And I said, you need to think about this. So, it's been a very uneven path. We have made a lot of progress, don't get me wrong, but we've made some mistakes, and we continue to still self-balkanize ourselves in ways that are not helpful.
I would agree. So you alluded briefly to some of your research. I'm really interested. You wrote what I thought was an outstanding paper on relationship satisfaction among older people in polyamorous relationships. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Oh, absolutely. Dr. Daryl Cox, who was then only a master's student, and I did this back. Loving More, the National Polyamory Organization, approached me about doing a research survey of the community because they were having challenges around answering media questions about poly's interest in legal marriage. They didn't feel authoritative enough to address this, and approached me and Dr. Kurt Bergstrom, who had written a book it was called Swinging, but it was more about poly, to do some research around that. And I was happy to do it. I said, sure, as long as we can add some more stuff. And they said, sure. So Dr. Bergstrom and I, Kurt and I, have put together a really substantial survey. And with Loving More's support, we put it out to the wider poly non-monogamous community. I enlisted NCSF's support, and they put it out through their coalition partners. I enlisted a bunch of my friends from the American Association of Sexuality Educators, Counselors, and Therapists to put it out to their networks. And at the end of the day, we got over 4,000 responses, which was the largest such study ever conducted. And it's like all convenient samples, it's not nationally representative. There's lots of caveats, okay. But still, it was the biggest chunk of what had ever been done. And then we found that Sexual and Relationship Therapy magazine was going to do a special issue on aging. So we extracted from that larger 4,000 plus sample a subsample of 502 people 55 plus and compared them to a sample of 723 drawn from the US General Social Survey. That was our control group. And wrote the paper that ultimately was published in that special issue and became a chapter in an academic book on sexuality and aging. And we found a bunch of really interesting things. The senior population in our survey was uniformly had more sexual partners, had more sex, and as a consequence of that, the cascade effect, we know that having more sex in any relationship is good for your health, and it's good for the relationship satisfaction, and obviously your sexual satisfaction. And lo and behold, all those things held true in our sample. They were substantially, statistically significantly more happy, healthier, more aware of the risk of STDs. They were getting STI tests, or at least HIV tests, at 3 times the rate of the comparable group in the general population. And one of the things that's out there in the epidemiological world, one of the greatest risk groups right now for STIs is the older population, the population that didn't grow up learning to use condoms and barrier protection and have the safer sex conversations. Because when you grew up in the 50s and 60s, you didn't have those conversations. But now you need to have those conversations. And
there's Viagra.
Yeah, exactly. So it was a very heartening finding that, yeah, consistent with other research, the older non-monogamous community is just as sensitive and aware of the need for safer sex practices as the younger ones are, and that's essential. And we checked whether they were happy in their relationships, and they were. They were as happy as the monogamous, ostensibly monogamous, because we know there's a lot of cheating that goes on, but of the ostensibly monogamous similar groups. And so there was no dissatisfaction with being non-monogamous. It didn't impede the quality of their relationships in any way, shape, or form. It contributed substantially to their positive outcomes, to their feeling healthier, happier, more sexually and relationally satisfied. So it was quite an important finding. And one of the things that was an important sub-finding that we want to tease out and work more on, we have a paper right now in review for Archives of Sexual Behavior on further expansion of from the whole data set. But we found that the unpartnered people, the singles, the divorced, the never married, the people that right now in the middle of this COVID crisis that we're in are most at risk for dangers of isolation and loneliness, and who have been singled out in the past as being significantly less happy and less satisfied with life and more at risk health-wise. We found that within our sample, the people who matched that demographic were significantly happier, having significantly more sexual interactions, significantly healthier than the comparable group in the general population. It wasn't super statistically robust because the sample size was small. But in the larger sample, I think we're going to be able to tease out more statistically significant data that's going to be very important for us to focus on. And we may do a follow-up study focusing on this age cohort, because it is especially salient right now with so many people being locked down and the medical community bracing itself for the next wave of COVID, but also the next wave of mental illness and poor mental health outcomes from loneliness and isolation. And we're not saying, yeah, everybody should be polyamorous because that solves your problems. But on the other hand, for those who are older and polyamorous, or non-monogamous at least, it seems to have a positive effect. So maybe you should think about it.
Very interesting. Thank you so much for your time, Jim.
Oh, happy to.
Question for you.
Yeah.
If you had one piece of advice for counselors and therapists who want to be effective in serving CNM populations, and I realize you're not a therapist, you're a coach, which is a useful thing, but you do not claim to provide therapy. I don't want to make it sound like that.
No, like I've said, you know, I'm not a therapist. I have no licensure or advanced credentials. I don't even play one on TV. On the other hand, for the last 18 years, people who have those credentials and are those things pay organizations to hear what I have to say. I've done 13 presentations for ASECT. I've done Society for Sex Therapy and Research, American Association of Marriage and Family Therapists. So those people pay attention to what I have to say. Not enough of them, unfortunately, but nevertheless, I try. That was one of my missions, was to reach out to those communities and help change that for the better. But
so what kind of advice do you have for counselors and therapists about one piece to be effective?
I think you have to check your prejudice at the door. I mean, right now I'm on the American Psychological Association task force, as I know you are too, on consensual non-monogamy, and we're working on developing outreach to the psychology community around this. But it's like, check your prejudices at the door, do your research, know what the research says, not what your enculturated beliefs are, and meet people where they are. I mean, I just, came out with a book. It's not about polyamory per se. It's derived from the experiences I've had working with polyamorous people and non-monogamous people for the last 20 plus years. But there's a lot of lessons in it for everybody who's in a relationship. And the book is called Love That Works, 38 Awesome Hacks for Amazing Relationships. You can find it at ltwthebook.com. And, in there I talk about a lot of these skill sets: communication, creating safe space for honesty within the relationship, mindfulness, mindful reasoning, and enhanced differentiation of self, all characteristics that polys exhibit in spades because they have to, but are helpful for anyone in any relationship. So definitely, I have that to share, and I encourage the therapeutic community, as I have for the last 18 years, to do those things, because I think it will help them, and it's gotten vastly better. One of the things that launched me into this was my intervention with a Johns Hopkins trained psychiatrist who insisted that I was pathological from the get-go. And I knew he was full of shit, pardon my language, but I couldn't prove it. And so that launched me into my research career, trying to find stuff to prove that he was wrong. And here I am 20 plus years later, teaching people about this.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Jim. I really
appreciate
that. And good luck with your new book.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And stay healthy.
Do my best. I'm awesome. Staying home.
Yes, good. Me too.
All right. Take care, Ellie.
Bye.
Bye.